I'll call to order the February 23rd meeting of the Santa Barbara City Finance Committee. The first item of the agenda is the loan restatement request on property located at 1018 and 1028 Castillo Street. Mr. Rowell, do you have that staff report, or Mr. Samara?
No.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Chairman Hart and Finance Committee members. This is a loan restatement request for Castillo Homes located at 1018 to 1028 Castillo Street. This is a request that the Finance Committee consider and recommend that Council approve a restatement of the redevelopment agency loan and deed of trust, approve an amendment to the existing affordability covenant, and authorize the execution of the necessary documents. Castillo Homes is owned by Community Housing Corporation. The property is 100% affordable senior rental units. There's a total of 32 one-bedroom units, 12 of which are restricted to low-income households, and 21 bedroom units that are restricted to moderate-income households. In 1986, the redevelopment agency lent $597,000 to build Castillo Homes. It was used in conjunction with other financing. The loan itself has a 4.5% simple interest, and the repayment provision is based on the residual receipts method. The residual receipts method is basically you take the gross rents minus operating expenses, allowing for reserves, and if there's some positive cash flow, then a payment is due. This particular loan is scheduled to expire July of this year in 2016. The current financing on Castillo Homes is as follows. In first position, there's a bond with an outstanding balance of $691,915. The second position is the City of Santa Barbara's loan with a balance of $809,866 as of February 16th of this year. And then the State of California has a loan for $150,000 for a total outstanding debt of $1,651,781. If you take a very conservative valuation on Castillo Homes of $5 million, that represents a combined loan to value of only 33%. The requested loan restatement terms are as follows: a 3% simple interest rate, allowing the reserves to be increased from currently 6% to 10% of the gross revenues. The reason for that is this is an aging project, and those additional reserves can be used for much-needed repairs to extend the useful life of the project for many years to come. The loan, of course, would be extended to expire 30 years from now in July 2046. As far as the repayment terms of the loan restatement, effective 30 days after the recordation of the loan restatement, the monthly payment would be $5,000 or the calculated residual receipts payment, whichever is greater. On December 2020, when the bond is paid off, the bond's in first position, the minimum monthly payment will rise to $10,500 per month. Under these repayment scenarios, it's estimated that the city loan will be repaid in about 12 years. We also like to amend the affordability covenant. We'd like to extend the affordability an additional 30 years. The covenant's scheduled to expire July 2016 of this year. In addition, we'd like to add a provision that allows for flexibility on rent adjustments for modern income units to encourage turnover. Basically, in an annual basis, there's a certification of tenants, and if the tenant's income is above moderate income levels, the rent can be increased to as much as 30% of their gross annual income, but it can't exceed the fair market rents as published by HUD. So the idea there is to bump the rents a little bit, hoping to encourage them to move on so we can take some folks off the waiting list. This restatement request benefits both the owner and the city. The owner benefits because they have an extended loan term. They now have predictable payments to the city. And with this project, they can provide quality, affordable senior housing for decades to come. The city benefits because there's no additional cost with this request to the city. The loan security of the city's loan increases over time because not only is the loan balance paid down on the city loan, But as I mentioned before, the bond in first position will be paid off in 2020. We're also extending the affordability an additional 30 years on this senior housing project. And finally, these guaranteed payments go to support the city affordable housing program, both with the guaranteed payments going towards compliance of the affordable housing program and monitoring, as well as rehabilitation of existing affordable units and hopefully the development of some new affordable units. So that concludes my presentation on this request. I'd happy to answer any questions you might have. We also have Cindy Young from Community Housing Corp in the audience if you'd like to direct any questions her way. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Mr. Rao? Councilmember White.
So there's back to the first. I think it's the first. The overall statement of the money. Doesn't slide 5.
Current financing?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
So the city of Santa Barbara has $810,000 that's owed.
Correct.
As of 2016, and as of July 2016.
Member White, that's correct.
Is that general fund money?
No, that's not general fund money. That's redevelopment agency fund money.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Councilmember Dominguez?
To follow up on that, where does that money then get repaid to? Which account?
Member Dominguez, it gets repaid to the Community Development Department, and it's credited back to the Redevelopment Agency account, which is now the Housing Successor account, and it's used to fund future projects, either for rehabilitation or added financing for, say, a tax credit application for a new development.
The $5,600 per month amount, how long, what's the history of that level of residual receipt payment?
Member Dominguez, it's been pretty consistent. Last year, they paid a little bit more. It was $6,812. In 2013, it was $5,919. And in 2012, it was $7,302 per month. It varies slightly with things like repairs that are needed or vacancies that come in or what the charged rents are for each individual tenant. But it's been pretty consistent. What we're trying to do here is put a floor of the $5,000 underneath it, and it's quite possible the residual receipt payment will be higher.
So what happens if they get an unexpected expense and they don't have residuals enough to meet the $5,000 ceiling?
It's a required payment.
So they have a reserve, they would pull it out of their reserves?
Cindy Young's shaking her head yes. You want to come up and answer that question?
Yes, we've got plenty of reserves to cover the $5,000.
Just push the button.
Push, thank you. I'm sorry. We've been paying $5,000 plus and doing not major repairs, but repairs that have to be made on the property. We also have set aside for roof replacement and major items that will need fixing in the next 10 years.
And that's at the 6 to 10% level?
Mm-hmm.
And was this property developed in 1986, or was that just when the financing started?
No, it was developed in 1986. We developed it and built it.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Actually, one more question, Mr. Chair.
Councilmember White?
Thank you. So this is the first time that I remember hearing about a moderate income project coming in and then now a tweak in the cash flow suggested there. Can you be a little more specific on, since this is new to me, what's the rent? Just give us a real-world example of even a single tenant and how that would, what those numbers
You want
are.
to address it or do you want me?
I can start. And then Member White, basically the provision is put in place because this is a tax credit project. And in a tax credit project, in order to evict somebody or terminate a lease, you have to have what's known as good cause. And good cause is not the fact that their income's too high. It's something along the lines of they didn't make their rent payment or they violated their lease. So this proposal is to slightly increase the rents. To give you an idea,
From what to what? It's kind of
yeah, okay. The rent on average is about $837.
That's for the moderate. There's two
Yes.
chunks here. There's
That's for the
low
moderate.
income, and I get that. This is the moderate.
And the
800
maximum that it could go up to would be $1,312.
Okay.
And so it's about potentially a $500 a month increase. Many of the tenants that occupy Castillo Homes are Section 8 vouchered. So there's a subsidy coming on the voucher, and they pay quite a bit less than what I've described there.
So we have a moderate income tenant,
Mm-hmm.
and that can up to 30% of their income can be used to pay rent.
That's correct.
So that just goes on as an ongoing exam. There's a review of their income on some kind of regular basis.
There's an annual certification process, and then they would review their income, and they could take as much as 30%. But keep in mind, it's capped at the HUD published fair market rents, which at this time is $1,312.
Yeah, that's a big increase, obviously, from the 800. Do we have a sense of, and there are X number of people in that apartment complex?
We have 32 tenants over there right now.
But the moderate, you have 20 moderate.
No, there's 20 set aside for moderate. We actually, every unit over there is filled with low income, not moderate. I don't have any moderate income tenants at Castillo Homes.
How does that match up with what we have in our staff report? It says 20 moderate.
The covenants were set up originally that we would set aside so many for moderate and so many for low income. However, it's based on our wait list. We're not going to not rent to a low income person because we're looking for a moderate income person. So whoever's first on the wait list is going to get the apartment, which is low income. It's mostly low income seniors over there. The average income at Castillo Homes is less than $11,000 per year. So there's nobody over there that's even close to the moderate income, which is $30,000 a year.
Okay. How does that? Just so that I understand how we get there. There are 20 units that are described here as moderate income units
That can be used for moderate. So if somebody came in above low income, they could come in into a moderate unit. But we don't have anyone. Everybody is low income.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Chair.
I had a couple questions too. Just the original loan was for $597,000, and now we're refinancing $809,000. So in the 30 years, we've had negative amortization of loan because of the residual payment schedule. We never got to that point until recently. We're to the level where you can make payments that are going to pay off the principal. Is that how that worked?
Yes, I believe we've been paying for over 5 years.
Chairman
total.
Hart, that's correct. Until recently, the loan balance was rising, and the interest, since it's simple interest, is only on the original $597,000, which is approximately $26,000 a year. So until they pay more than that, the balance continues to rise. So it went up, and now it's coming back down.
Right. And now it's on a glide slope to being paid off at this
Correct.
income stream.
Yeah, with
the monthly
with
payments.
the two-step payment plan, it'll take approximately 12 years for the loan to be paid off entirely.
Okay. Any other questions? I have a motion then.
I'll move the staff recommendation.
Is there a second? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstain? No one else? Thank you. Appreciate that, Mr. Ralph. Next up is the mid-year review of the fiscal year budget for 2016.
Yes.
Mr.
Thank you,
Samario?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Bob Samario, Finance Director. And we are going to present to you the mid-year review. And we're going to start with the general fund and looking at revenues. And Julie Nemes, our Treasury Manager, will start with that. And then she'll be followed by Jennifer Tomaszewski, our Accounting Manager, to talk about general fund expenditures and enterprise funds.
Ms. Nemes, hi.
Good afternoon, Chair Hart, committee members. I am Julie Nemes, the Treasury Manager for the Finance Department. I am here with Jennifer Tomaszewski, who is our Accounting Manager. And as Mr. Samario mentioned, we're here to present the mid-year financial review for fiscal year 2016. There are 4 areas we'll be covering today. I'll be focusing on general fund revenues. Ms. Tomaszewski will be focusing on general fund expenditures, enterprise fund revenue and expenses, and any proposed budget adjustments. This first table is a summary of general fund revenues for fiscal year 16 as of December 31st, 2015. And all of the tables I'll be going over today are a comparison of year-to-date actuals through December 31st compared to the year-to-date budget and compared to the prior year actuals through 12/31. For tax revenues, we seasonally adjust the year-to-date budget column for a 3-year average of revenues collected through 12/31. This helps us adjust for revenues that are not always collected evenly throughout the year. And what you'll see here is there's 3 main categories. Taxes and other revenues are trending slightly below the year-to-date budget, whereas fees and service charges are trending above the year-to-date budget. But overall, revenues are pretty close to the year-to-date budget, coming in about $328,000 below. When on a percent received basis, it's 45% received versus 45.3% received on a 3-year average. And compared to the prior year, revenues are up from prior year by about 3.6% or $1.9 million. And each of these individual categories, I'll be going into more detail on the next few slides. So the next one I'll be covering is tax revenues. It was on that first summary slide. It is one that we seasonally adjust. We apply that 3-year average. And overall, tax revenues are coming in slightly below the year-to-date budget by $625,000. However, they have increased over prior year by about 1.8%. And I wanted to mention that Mr. Samario presented at the most recent budget session some detailed information on these general fund tax revenues. So I won't be providing a lot of detail today, but I'll go over some of the general variances, and I'm happy to answer any questions. The first one I wanted to discuss was sales and use tax. While this is 2 quarters worth actually booked on a cash basis, it only represents 1 quarter for fiscal year 2016. And as Mr. Samario mentioned at the budget session, there were some one-time adjustments that happened in the prior year and the current year that are affecting our sales tax growth for fiscal year 16. We're also seeing the impacts of things such as lower gas prices, low inflation, more internet sales that don't produce sales and use tax. So that's all affecting our sales and use tax revenues. We are projecting that sales and use tax will be below budget by a little over $1 million by year end. Next are property tax revenues. Overall, property taxes are coming in above budget. This is almost entirely due to an increase in assessed values per county records. Utility users taxes are slightly below the year-to-date budget at 12/31, about $107,000, about even with the prior fiscal year. There's 2 main reasons for this. One is a decrease in natural gas prices. The other one, there's this general change in traditional telephone, landline telephone usage and cell phone usage to prepaid cell phone usage, and that's affecting our UUT revenues. And lastly, our transient occupancy taxes, which are down about $490,000 compared to the year-to-date budget. There are multiple factors that affect TOT revenues, some of them being the number of available rooms, the average room rate, weather conditions can impact TOT. So we're seeing, I think there's a multitude of issues that are going on here. One of them that we saw that's consistently month to month affecting us is the closure of a well-established motel. Definitely impacted our results for the current fiscal year, and we are projecting to be under budget by the end of the fiscal year. Next, I'm going to go over the other revenues. These are things such as license and permits and fines and forfeitures. Overall, these revenues are trending just slightly below the year-to-date budget by about $200,000 and just slightly above the prior fiscal year. There's a few variances I was going to focus on, first being fines and forfeitures, which is about $400,000 below the year-to-date budget. This is almost entirely due to a new billing system in place at the police department. Those are for police citation revenues. The December revenues, about $350,000 worth, were booked in January versus December, so that impacted this number. Once you make that adjustment, we're off about $100,000 at mid-year. Next are franchise fees. Mr. Samario also touched on this at the budget session. We are down about $130,000 versus the year-to-date budget. This is also due to the decline in natural gas prices, and we also had the change from last year due to that 1% utility surcharge that we are currently setting aside. And last, intergovernmental is up about $470,000 compared to the year-to-date budget. This is almost entirely due to mutual aid reimbursements. Fire department budgeted, I believe, about $420,000 for mutual aid, and as of 12/31, they've received over $680,000. You will notice it's almost 200% higher than the prior fiscal year, and that's due to the timing of the receipt of those mutual aid revenues. We did receive more mutual aid revenues last year, but as of 12/31, we'd only received about $100,000 by that point. Next, I'll be providing a little bit more detail on our miscellaneous revenues. I'll go back for 1 second. I just wanted to point out the very last row is miscellaneous revenues. It's in line with the budget. It's only about $10,000 below, but the next slide provides a little more detail on what's in that line. So you'll see overall, we're in line with the year-to-date budget, down about $10,000, but above the prior fiscal year by 8%. It's made up of 3 main categories, and the only one that's below year-to-date budget is operating and transfers in. And this is due to a reduction in the transfer from the Traffic Safety Fund for moving traffic citations from the county. Staff does believe we'll see a pickup in those revenues in the second half of the fiscal year, but we'll be watching it really closely, and if it doesn't, it may come in under budget at year end. And lastly, I'll be going over department fees and service charges. Overall, department fees and service charges are outperforming the year-to-date budget by about $500,000 and exceeding the prior fiscal year by over 12%. There's a few variances I was going to focus on, first being community development. Community development is about $430,000 over the year-to-date budget, primarily due to increases in building permits, development permits, and other planning and zoning type of revenues. Staff does believe this trend will continue in the second half of the fiscal year and thinks that revenues could be as high as $625,000 over budget by year end. Next is Parks and Recreation. Right now it's showing that it's $265,000 over the year-to-date budget and 40% over the prior fiscal year, but this is entirely due to a change in accounting method. We saw a slight increase in youth programs, but the change in accounting method is the most significant impact here. In fiscal year 15, we took a portion of those revenues and actually held them and instead charged them to fiscal year 16 in an effort to more accurately represent the cost of a program to when the revenues were received, as opposed to just doing it on a fiscal year basis, since a lot of the Parks and Recreation programs are over the summer. Last is public safety. Public safety revenues are coming in under budget by about $85,000 at mid-year. They're about 20% down from prior fiscal year. We're seeing several revenue sources coming in a little bit lower, such as dismissal fees, vehicle release fees, document viewing fees, as well as false alarm billings, but those tend to pick up in the second half of the fiscal year when we have more false alarms, and that's when customers tend to get billed or will get billed, because you have to have several false alarms before you are billed. And the reason some of these other fees are lower is we've had some temporary staffing vacancies that affected some of the revenues, as well as a change in the state law regarding towing vehicles. And that change in state law has actually affected some of our revenues, such as the vehicle release fees. So staff does believe that we will be below budget for this fiscal year primarily because of those changes in state laws, but also the staffing vacancies. So we believe we'll be down by about $100,000 at fiscal year end, but it could be a little bit more. And those were all of the areas I was going to focus on today, but I'm happy to answer any questions before I pass it off to Ms. Tomaszewski.
Thank you, Ms. Neves. Any questions? Councilmember White?
Thank you. Well, one request for the future is that I think it would be helpful for everybody to see this sea change that's happening with internet sales, and just to have a slide or two. And I expect, certainly, clearly not you guys doing big time research to find out, but if there's an easily accessible source of just the trend and where we are, it's just as we are struggling with our infrastructure discussion and so forth, I think just for folks to have that information would be helpful. So just sometime in the future. I have a question. I just want to make sure, and again, this may be just for another time, that the community development is seeing that's a substantial increase permit fees and such like, and I want to make sure that our waiting time and such like is staying in bounds. That we're not just overwhelmed such that we're not providing good customer service. So appreciate some feedback on that at some point. Then I didn't understand your last comment about staffing vacancies causing staff vacancies in the police department. Was that what it is?
Correct.
That's causing a reduction in revenues?
Correct. If they have less member white,
Is this parking violation
this one
stuff, or-
specifically is related to things such as dismissal fees and document viewing fees. And when there's less people available to process some of these requests and do some of these actions, we just don't achieve as many revenues. But the majority of that reduction in revenues was related to that change in state law related to the vehicle release fees. And the false alarm billings are always a little bit lower. We don't seasonally adjust these fees because most of them tend to be pretty steady throughout the year. So we do always generally see public safety a little bit lower in the first half of the year when false alarm billings are lower, and those will be higher in the second half of the year. I'm not sure if we have anyone here. If Lori Peterson is here from police, if she wants to speak any more regarding the vacancies.
Good afternoon, Lori Peterson, Business Manager at the Police Department. So the vacancy rate is in the parking enforcement area, and that's where we continue to see that, and that impacts the dismissal fees for correctable citations such as tags and registration. So that's kind of where you're seeing it. All right, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions? Councilmember Dominguez?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Going back to the sales tax number, I missed what you said. You said there's only 1 quarter booked, or?
Yeah.
Member Dominguez, we have 2 quarters represented in that number, but it's 1 quarter. All the sales taxes are always 1 quarter in arrears. So there's only 1 quarter of fiscal year 16 that's actually represented in that number, even though there's 2 years booked in that number. So 1 quarter, only 1 quarter booked in that number, even though there's 2 quarters. So 1 quarter relates to fiscal year 15, and 1 quarter relates to fiscal year 16.
And I'm sorry, which line item are you referring to? Which number?
The sales and use tax number, here I can go.
And
Sorry,
that's
one
for all the
moment.
numbers in that row? These are
So
all?
the first row on sales and use tax, that figure for the year-to-date actually represents 2 quarters of sales tax, but it's 1 quarter of fiscal year 15 and 1 quarter of fiscal year 16 on a cash basis in terms of what we receive, because we receive sales tax 1 quarter in arrears.
So what are you actually comparing that number to? The budget year, is that also only booked 1 quarter at a time, or 1 quarter from one fiscal year and another quarter from a fiscal year?
No, the budget is for fiscal year 16, but when we look at it, so we compare it on a cash basis. So this is a comparison on a cash basis. It includes the receipt related to fiscal year 15, that 1 quarter, and the 1 quarter for fiscal year 16. But when we're looking at growth and trends, it helps to know that that's only related to the 1 quarter in fiscal year 16. And we do accrue at the end of the year. We do make adjustments at the end of the year to accrue for the difference in that 1 quarter that we received later, which is much later in the year, and we accrue back to fiscal year 16. But we can't.
The year-to-date budget and the year-to-date actual, these cover the same time periods?
They do.
Covering the same 2 quarters?
They do on a cash basis. We will, at the end of the year, true it up, but we don't have the information for the second quarter of fiscal year 16 till much later, so we're unable to adjust for that as of 12/31. But there would be a slight amount of a change one way or the other to true that up for the first 6 months. But because that's 1 quarter in arrears, we have to go off what we received on a cash basis, even though that's a quarter behind. I hope that makes sense. Maybe
Yeah,
I'm
you're
not
talking
explaining it
about
very
the
well.
money, you're talking about the cash that you received as opposed to what you booked or what you posted.
No, we actually book. We have to book everything that we receive, but when we book on an accrual basis, all of these are booked on an accrual basis at the end of the year. But because we don't have that information at this time to report to you, because we haven't received the next quarter yet, I'm unable to give you what the adjustment would be to give you the second quarter to show you truly what was earned and received for that first 6 months.
And that's because at some point you'll be giving some of that money back, or
No, it's just a timing difference. It's purely timing. We have to wait to receive that second quarter, and it's always given to us a quarter in arrears. So we have to wait the next 3 months before we get that next quarter. So we have to, right now, throughout the year, all we can present to you is what we've received at this point. But at the end of the year, as we close our books and we wait, because we close our books several months after the fiscal year end, we're able to then get that final payment and true up our total sales and use tax for the year.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Ms. News? Thank you very much for the presentation. Ms. Tomaszewski?
Good afternoon, Chair Hart and committee members. I'm Jennifer Tomaszewski, the accounting manager for the finance department, and I will be going over the general fund expenditures and the enterprise funds today, and I will also be reviewing several budget adjustments with you as well. And I need to speak louder. Okay, so on this first slide, this is the general fund expenditures. The first column, it's broken out by department. And the second column is the adjusted annual budget. And again, that's original budget with carry forward from prior year and any appropriation adjustments throughout the year. The second column is the year-to-date budget. And again, that is adjusted for a 3-year trend as well. And where we will be discussing today is here with the variances without the encumbrances. And this is the variance from the year-to-date budget compared to actual. And the first item of note is with mayor and council at mid-year, December 31st. Their mayor and council expenditures were $265,000 below budget, and this is simply a timing difference. It relates to quarterly payments for an annual contract with Visit Santa Barbara to promote the city as a tourist destination. And the second payment was made in January instead of December. But by year end, they do anticipate that they will be within budget. And the second area would be with the police department. And you're going to hear kind of a theme of this. This is a continuing theme that we've talked about in past, and it's still an issue, is across several departments we're seeing continued savings with salaries and benefits due to vacancies, retirements, difficulties filling some of these positions. So with the police at mid-year, they have a savings of about $914,000. Some of this was due to some overtime charges, but they were offset by the vacancy savings. In addition, with fire, we're seeing the opposite, and this is comprised of two issues. At mid-year, fire is over budget by about $781,000. Part of this is also relating to overtime. I think in September there were about 10 vacant positions that were filled from graduates coming out of the fire academy that will reduce these overtime costs, but that has been part of why we've seen this increase in salaries in the past. In addition to that, the other half being mutual aid activities. Mutual aid, of this $780,000, about $550,000 of that's related to increased salaries due to mutual aid activities. Ms. Nemes did touch on the revenue side, as they do correlate when salaries are over budget for those mutual aid activities. We're more than collecting for that on the revenue side. So even though we're about $550,000 over budget on the salary side, I think by year end the department estimates about $1.2 million in total revenues for mutual aid activities. And I believe they'll be bringing back a budget adjustment towards year end to record those mutual aid activities. The next department is Parks and Recreation, and again, what we're seeing is a favorable variance due to salaries and benefit savings here as well. The department is actively recruiting and plans to have their positions filled by July of this year. And lastly, community development. Again, we see a $768,000 savings from year-to-date budget at mid-year. And again, a big portion of this was salaries and benefit savings as well. Let's see. Approximately $55,000 is across the board savings in services and supplies, but the majority of that is salaries savings. Land development and building construction activity is stretching staff resources. So at later third quarter or by year end, they may be coming back to the board or to the council, excuse me, and requesting to use some of that savings for contract, to hire contract and hourly staff. So, oops, sorry about that. So in total, what we see is $125.9 thousand of annual budget, a year-to-date budget of about $66 million, and a variance of about $3.8 million at mid-year. That again, some of that is due to timing differences. A majority of that is salaries and salaries savings from vacancies. And we do have about $4 million of encumbrance at mid-year, so that variance will close, that gap will close as we get closer to year end. Any questions before I move
The
on?
non-departmental numbers, that's just a timing issue?
I'm sorry, on which
The
one?
last one on there that you didn't highlight,
Oh, the
non-departmental.
non-departmental.
The big variance there is just a timing?
Well, this is basically, it's an appropriation for anticipated use of reserves that's built into the budget. Mr. Samario, would you like to speak to this?
Mr. Chair, when we adopted the budget for 16, you may recall we actually had a budgeted surplus of about $1.8 million or so. We put all of that into an appropriated reserve. We didn't just leave it as a surplus. We actually appropriated it, and knowing that we're not going to spend that money, and by the end of the year, then we would have that money available to fall to reserves. So this is kind of a prorated analysis, but really that 1.2 million means that we have that money set aside, the surplus that we're going to then, it'll fall to reserves at year end. It just won't be spent during the year. So you'll always see this variance throughout the year.
Okay, thank you.
So next I will go into enterprise funds. And it's a similar, this slide's, the layout of this slide is very similar to the last slide. We have the enterprise funds, and then the first column is the annual budget with carry forward and appropriation adjustments throughout the year, comparing year-to-date budget also with the 3-year trend analysis, and year-to-date variance, which is, again, the year-to-date budget compared to actual at mid-year. The first area of discussion is the water fund. At mid-year, the water fund shows about a $1.8 million savings. Reduction in revenues. And when the budgets were developed, there was an assumption of about a 25% demand reduction. However, during the first half of the year, customers have achieved about a 34% reduction in water usage. So this accounts for about 1.3 million of this shortfall. And the department does anticipate that this will reach about 2 million by year end. On the expenditure side, we are at mid-year, there's a savings of about 1 million. And this is a combination of a couple things. There's debt service is a portion of this. And it's with the debt service, it's simply a timing issue. There were more payments made in the debt service in the first half of the year, but they were offset by about 1.8 million of savings in services and supplies. So the net effect of that is about $1 million savings. And again, the services and supplies, they relate to chemicals, waste disposal, electricity, and as the demand for water is reduced, so is the need for those services and supplies. And the department projects that that will also reach about a $2 million savings to offset the reduction in revenues by year end. The next fund would be the wastewater fund, and I didn't highlight the revenues. There's about a $7,000 reduction of revenues compared to budget, which is very close to budget, but the department does project that that will be a deficit of about $275,000 by year end, and that trends similar to the reduction in water. On the expense side, the $218,000 that we see at mid-year is again related to vacancies across the board, including the wastewater manager position. I believe staff do anticipate that these positions will remain vacant, and by year end there'll be about a $310,000 savings over budget, which will offset the reduction in revenues as well. The airport fund revenues are about $207,000 below budget at mid-year. About $100,000 of this is due to vacancies on commercial leases, and there was a loss of revenue due to the sale of property. And as well, there were a couple reimbursement revenues that were delayed. However, these are anticipated to be received by year end. I believe it was the TSA law enforcement officer reimbursement and the runway protection zone analysis reimbursement from the city of Goleta. I had to write that one down. That was a mouthful. Okay. So the remainder of the reductions are actually spread across revenue sources, kind of across the board. Revenues were just coming in lower than budget. And on the expense side, again, we're seeing savings from vacancies as well. At mid-year, it's about $416,000, and staff project that that will rise to about $700,000 savings by year end. And just quickly on the golf fund, what we see at mid-year is revenues about $63,000 below budget. This is higher. It's trending similar, slightly higher than last year at this time. However, it is below budget at this point. And then lastly, the waterfront. Again, we're seeing a pattern of increased waterfront revenues, and at mid-year, about $671,000 above budget. And this is just a continuation of the good weather. A big portion of this is property management, mostly related to Harbor Food Service, the Wharf Food Service, and the Waterfront Grill. In addition, there's been about an addition of about 3 cruise ships, which have also increased that revenue.
I just wanted to point out that a lot of the variance, the favorable variance, is because they budget pretty conservatively. If you look at last year, we were actually below last year. In total revenues, we were almost 8.1 last year. This year, at least at mid-year, we're $7.7 million. And we talked about this at the work session, that they're starting to see a little bit of waning of revenues in the commercial and food leases area. Parking is still up across the board except for the harbor because of the construction, but not the harbor, but the wharf. So they are seeing a little bit of the revenues going down, but the variance is primarily because they're typically very conservative, and they were anticipating a lot of rain this year, so they kind of lowered their estimates this year.
Thank you.
So that's all I have for the enterprise funds, unless anybody has any questions before I move on.
Any questions? Councilmember White?
Thank you. So you mentioned the vacancy in the commercial leases at the airport. Can you have Is there,
Yeah.
I don't see an airport person here, I guess. Anyway, I'm curious to know what that,
You know,
what that is.
I can look into that and get back to you.
Okay. And then a comment that we're trending lower in revenues at the golf course, and that's despite the Montecito Country Club being closed. And I know that I know from secondhand with family members that are Montecito Country Club folks that are playing golf at Muni, that even despite that closure, we're still seeing.
Yeah, Mr. Chair and Committee Member Mindy White, I'll let Mark jump in if you'd like, but you may recall that we were a little more aggressive in our revenue estimates this year because we budgeted an additional $25,000 for marketing, and with the efforts that we're doing with online stuff, we thought we would do really well. So I think the budget reflects probably a little bit of an aggressive estimate relative to what we were seeing. We were just hoping that because of additional marketing efforts, we would see the numbers
Do
rise.
better.
It just hasn't materialized.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Mark could jump more.
Well,
add more if he wants.
I think that we've made some difficult decisions around the golf course, and I think that those are, and I appreciate that Mr. Hart has some different ideas there, but that at least it's those. I think it was a good idea that we at least confronted those difficult decisions, and we're just still seeing the need to watch that very closely. And then finally, comment on the waterfront. We're still seeing the great weather. We're obviously completely unforecast, and I'm going to continue to lobby for putting a little more money into our fleet, our boat fleet sinking fund, whatever we want to call it, that started last year. I just think it's still it's underfunded, and it's an opportunity to make put some acorns in that tree. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, please continue then.
Okay, so next I have about 5 slides of various budget adjustments that we'll be going through. So in this first section for general fund, this first budget adjustment relates to the City TV. As part of the City TV meeting room equipment upgrade project, staff plan to upgrade the Granicus video streaming equipment. However, before the project starts, the equipment is, the warranty on the equipment is going to expire about 4 to 6 months before the project starts. And IS staff have recommended that we do pay for this warranty in case there's any equipment failure in that in-between time. So this budget adjustment appropriates $16,000 into the general fund City TV program to pay for the warranty. At the same time, right now the general fund has about $52,000 in PEG fees in reserves that were to be used to fund this project. And so as part of the other part of this budget adjustment moves the difference after paying for the warranty, moves the difference to the capital outlay fund to help fund the program. The next section of budget adjustments is for Parks and Recreation, and this is actually 2 budget adjustments for 2 separate parks programs. The first one being the iSurf program. Now this program offers beginning level surf lessons to youth ages 5 to 15 while focusing on confidence building. And due to the success of this program, staff have worked with the contractor who provides the program to increase the scope for fiscal year 16. And so they're requesting a $25,000 adjustment to the estimated revenues and appropriations. And the second program is the Tiny Timbers program. Now this one relates to the Nature Camp program, which serves youth ages 7 to 11, and it offers about 280 spaces a year, and I believe there was quite a long waiting list. And so as a result of that, they've created this Tiny Timbers program, which is similar to the other program for a target age of 4 to 6 years of age, and an additional 120 spaces. So this adjustment would allow for the increased scope for both of those programs. And the next section is relates to the library general fund program, and there's 2 budget adjustments here as well. The first one is the library received funding from, now I'm probably going to say this wrong, the Tweed Tui Foundation through the Friends of the Santa Barbara Library for $15,000 and another $25,000 from the Orphalia Foundation. And these are to be spent on the Children's Library, Adult Literacy, and the Tech Lab. And this adjustment increases the program for $40,000 to purchase the materials for those purposes. And the next adjustment is relates to the Cooper's Trust, and the city maintains in the library gift fund and the library gift trust fund there a reserve from the Cooper's Trust, and this was restricted in purpose for books and audios that fall within the categories of art, spirituality, and psychology. And this adjustment allows the appropriations to purchase these allowable materials. And then, well, that's really hard to see. This first section of budget adjustments, we're actually going to see several of these on the next few slides, but there are several adjustments being presented today that are basically procedural adjustments that move remaining budgets from completed capital projects back into the operating funds. So it's basically a cleanup to allow for the increase in operating reserves to move them back. And that's what you're seeing here with the special revenue adjustments for the special revenue funds. And the next section is, this is the county library special revenue funds. And there's 2 adjustments here as well. The first one, Goleta Library received additional donations of $20,000 from the Friends of the Goleta Valley Library, and Carpinteria Library received $5,000 from the Friends of the Carpinteria Library. So this adjustment increases the estimated revenues and the appropriations by those amounts. And then this last one, now this is for the Police Miscellaneous Grants Fund, and this is relating to the SaberNet program. And this, if I said that right, the SaberNet program is Santa Barbara Regional Narcotics Enforcement Team. Basically, this was a multi-agency grant program managed through Santa Barbara County, which focused on narcotics efforts, but the grant is no longer available. And this removes the revenues and the appropriations from the budget for fiscal year 16. And the next slide, this first budget adjustment is in relation to the airports. So the airport funds portions of their FAA eligible projects up front before the grants are approved. And in this case, the Airport Capital Fund funded the design, which was required by the FAA prior to the award of the grant, and specifically for the airfield electrical and safety project. So this adjustment reimburses the airport's capital fund for the design costs before the grant was awarded. And this last block of adjustments, again, this is an adjustment to move the remaining budget back to the operating funds for several enterprise funds. Or actually, this is just the water operating fund. And this next slide, what you'll see, all 3 of these are for the same purpose. So this is for the wastewater, downtown parking, and then an ISF.
Any questions on those? Just as a group?
Anybody have any questions? Okay, no, thank
It's
you.
a lot of them. We just didn't want to
Yes,
go into all the
technical
detail
accounting
because
details, I totally understand.
between capital and operating funds.
Completely get it.
So on this last slide, this is the last of those cleanup adjustments. And this next adjustment, this is actually the other half of the library, the Cooper's Trust. This is just the other half of that adjustment. And then the very last adjustment today is for the K-9 Unit Trust Fund. So in this case, the city maintains a trust fund for donations received for the benefit of the Santa Barbara Police Department K-9 program. And these funds are used to help offset the cost of training, maintaining, and procuring the police dogs. For this adjustment, there was an error in the calculation of how much was needed for fiscal year 16. So this is a correction to true up the amount truly needed for the program for this year. And that is all of my adjustments.
Thank you, Ms.
Do you have any
Tomaszewski. Are there any
questions?
questions with the expenditure side? No. So last week we had a conversation about looking ahead at next year's budget, and you mentioned that potentially this year we might not have the surplus that we had originally hoped for, and that might have an impact on reserves. And we're at the mid-year, budget review. There aren't any recommendations to change those assumptions at this point, because you're thinking that there's still time over the fiscal year for that to work out with just reduced expenditures over time in comparison to the reduced revenues.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, just as a correction, I think I said that we would end the year right about balanced. We wouldn't have the surplus that we appropriated. We're probably going to consume all of that because all the revenues that we talked about, sales taxes, bed tax, are going to consume that. So we'll end the year sort of balanced in a sense that we'll still be at policy reserves. We're not going to be falling below that. 17 is where it's a little bit questionable whether we're going to maintain policy reserves or
Next
not.
year.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Is there a motion? I think to
The motion
recommend-
is to,
Recommend council's approval of the acceptance of the report and the
Mid-year budget
adjustments
adjustments.
themselves.
I would move that.
Is there a second? Second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstain? Matter carried.
Thank you.